aviation. So, I'm Kevin.
I'm Dylan.
I'm Cameron.
I'm Joanna.
Alright, so let me walk you through what we're going to do today for our presentation. So the table of contents. So the first slide is going to be the overview of the firm. We got procurement and supply capabilities. And then on the third slide, we have the SWOT analysis. On the fourth, we have identify primary supply challenges. Fifth, supporting data, management model application, and finally, initiative recommendations. So for the overview of the firm, it's founded in 1960 in Seattle, USA. It's the global leader in aerospace and defense. And for the history for the product services, commercial and military aircraft, we have satellites, weapons, and underneath weapons we have electronic and defense systems, launch systems, and advanced information and communications. So some of the highlights are major breakthroughs. In 1927, they launched the Model 48. It's a big major breakthrough because it's known for carrying like passengers and mail for the first time in 1927. In 1952, the 367-80 or the Dash 80 is a prototype of Boeing 707, the first commercially successful jet liner. They also have played big in the defense and space industries, and then they also developed military aircraft and unmanned systems. They're also involved in the Apollo program, and that was pretty good to me. They committed to innovation, technological advancements, and expanded reach in space exploration, defense, and advanced technologies. And that's pretty much the overview.
So procurement and supply capabilities. So Boeing's kind of general supply strategy, effectively since their inception, has been one of total life cycle management, especially given that they've worked in aviation where planes need to stay up in the air or people die. You tend to want the life cycle to be pretty good. So their focus has been primarily on working on that airplane, making sure it's good off the line, and then for its entire lifespan. They tend internally to refer to their supply chain as their combat capabilities, kind of a big nod to their military contracts, which make up roughly 40% of their income. Their supply processes and technology, they've been fully digital since 2018, which was a very expensive revamp of their supply chain process. They've got over 5,400 suppliers and they employ over 150,000 people. These suppliers are all global, of course they ship in somewhere around 2 to 3 million parts each month to their warehouses where they assemble some of their products. It's actually quite difficult to find any exact on some of this stuff because they have a lot of military contracts, as I mentioned, and I don't have the military clearance or anything to access that, so there's some secrecy there. They do have a lot of investment in insourcing and outsourcing. They tend to insource a lot of anything that is military contract or military related, and they tend to insource the final maintenance and building of their airplanes. But they outsource just about everything else that they could do. So they recently outsourced 2,700 jobs to India for finance and IT capabilities. And they've been doing that since 2001, 2002 is when their full investment into outsourcing happens. So of course outsourcing, that's kind of been their short-term investments of the long-term. It hit them pretty hard when COVID hit. A lot of their outsourced capabilities tend to fail or not work as well as they normally would because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that led to some significant downturns in profit as well as the 737 MAX situation. So the supplier selection and evaluation, it's highly complicated and I couldn't find a complete picture of it anywhere. All I could find was that it's constantly referred to as a deeply complex process that takes potentially 6 months, but sometimes as much as 2 years to complete while they're evaluating different firms. A lot of this does come from their military contracts again. Those are the 2-year, the long-term ones. They have to be very specific with those. A lot of that tends to end up just being in-house because it's cheaper, or they have the military clearance and their supplier doesn't, or they have to make sure their supplier can't keep up with the demands. One note that I did find was that they have a heavy reliance on long-term suppliers. Instead of working with as many new suppliers as they can and bring in more diversity, they just have this reliance on long-term contracts and suppliers. I think part of this comes from how long Boeing's been in business, being around since in aviation really the 1930s. They've just had suppliers that have worked since the 1930s, and they like to stick with those. Finally, for me, global supply management, they operate in over 131 countries. They're constantly looking to expand. One of their big areas of growth looking forward is in the African continent. They obviously have a quality digital supply system, and they continually invest in their supply chain, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic exposed so many resources were unable to keep up with the highly increased demand but lower revenues. That's all for me.
Okay, so we're gonna start with SWOT analysis. Starting with strengths, Boeing has been a very prominent name in the aerospace sector, so they have an established brand that has gained them a lot of recognition within the industry. And that recognition kind of gave them a competitive edge, always attracting new suppliers and partnerships. On top of their already strong relationships with suppliers that are referred to as innovative technological powerhouses. So they also have the widest variety of customer needs. They have commercial and private jets, corporate and commercial airlines, and they're very multi-source. They have companies with, or they have partnerships and resource connections ranging all over the world. So next are their weaknesses. Everyone was there for COVID-19, and there was a major disruption in supply chain. So during the pandemic, when the disruption began, they were negatively affected because they relied very heavily on their suppliers. So they began to shut down, and they had to deal with major delays and quality problems. And that affected their production overall that year. They also have an overdependence on their US contracts. One supplier is about 1/3 of their revenue, which means if anything happens to those contracts, Boeing would take a very big financial hit. So they also have kind of an issue right now of ineffectiveness in labor management. Mentioned before, the Boeing 37 MAX was an incident where 2 planes had crashed due to poor development, I guess. So after they declared that the 737 MAX was cut for any further development or production, they also fired around 2,000 people who were working on that plane. And on top of that, there was a union being formed within their employees, and anyone that they found kind of joining and supporting the union, they had also had cases of firing them for that specific reason. Next slide, please. So their opportunities, Boeing can do a few things in a position right now. They can, diversify their supply chain, which would reduce their reliance. They also can focus more on technological advancements. They can further develop the Space Force, which would then gain a higher position in competition with companies like Lockheed Martin or Northrop. They can also develop more eco-friendly planes, which would help fight global pollution. And they can leverage knowledge and share with suppliers and customers and stakeholders to create stronger relationships and enhance the management they have on their supply chain. And lastly, threats. There's fluctuations in the economy all the time, and those can cause uncertainty and demands for aerospace products, which can then impact their supply chain. So Boeing is always facing competition with other companies, which forces them to focus on constant improvements to keep the competitive edge. Like I said before, if they lose that competitive edge, say they don't have their US contracts, or if they lose any customers, they're taking a major financial loss. That's a few millions in loss. And for lastly, public perception, they were always facing security threats as well. They had incidents when the 787 development information was leaked, which then, set them back a lot, with other companies, and, they had to then, how do I say, like improve their security systems in every way that they could. And that can make them look bad with their customers, their stakeholders. They can face a lot of permanent, they can face a lot of negative, associations with their company because of the crash, because of the firing, and because of the, cybersecurity events. Sorry. That's it.
So just to kind of recap on what Pat was talking about there, the primary supply challenges for Boeing mainly revolve around their supply chain disruptions, because when they run into delays and quality issues with their key suppliers, it slows down their whole operation. And also just difficulty meeting customer demand because of those disruptions. That's partly due to their dependence on key suppliers, which makes their company vulnerable to disruption of their operations at any time. And it's really something where they haven't been focusing on supplier diversification. So if they worked on establishing new supplier relationships where they can get reliable, consistent quality parts, this would definitely help their operations. They need to focus on regulatory compliance, so working on safety, quality, environmental regulations, that sort of thing. And also just global economic conditions, focusing on geopolitical changes, trade disputes, and general fluctuations in the economy and uncertainties in demand.
So for the descriptions of the products and the services, Boeing develops, manufactures, and services commercial airplanes, defense products, and space systems for their customers in more than 150 countries. They provide a comprehensive portfolio and defense and security solutions. This includes military aircraft. So they also offer rotorcraft, satellites, weapon systems, electronics, and defense systems. For their services, they offer maintenance, modifications, upgrades, spare parts, training, and technical support for commercial and military customers. Their global services help enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of airlines and other operators. These services encompass supply chain management, maintenance and engineering support, and digital aviation solutions. For the supply management model application, they apply the just-in-time inventory system as a supply management model. They collaborate closely with suppliers, use demand forecasting, and employ lean manufacturing principles to minimize inventory levels. Supplier performance metrics are used to ensure on-time delivery and quality standards. Continuous improvement is a key focus with regular evaluation and refinement of the process. This model helps Boeing reduce costs, improve efficiency, and maintain viable supply chain.
All right, so as far as final recommendations for what Boeing should do for their supply chain, first, they should really focus on diversifying their supply base for their key components. Because as it is right now, critical parts for most of their aircraft are often sourced from single source suppliers, where any disruption in the chain for that supplier could disrupt their entire production cycle. And while we acknowledge that this is partly due to the fact that their contract with the US government inherently limit the suppliers they can source these critical components from, they need to expansion and diversification would be much needed to secure their supply chain and avoid disruptions in the future. Second, they need to improve their safety record in general. Ever since the 737 MAX 8 incidents or crashes, their reputation has been irreparably damaged, and company culture needs to change at Boeing in order to promote safety as the top priority and regain the trust of the general public. They also need to demonstrate a new commitment to testing and reliability to show customers that they make safe aircraft that will not have these kind of issues in the future. Third, they need to focus more on sustainability. Aviation accounted for about 2% of all greenhouse gas emissions in 2021, and that was even during a year that was affected by the COVID pandemic, so it used to be higher than that. And so focusing on improving fuel efficiency and sustainability, will, in their production cycle, will help improve public opinion and reduce their environmental impact. And finally, the recommendation, Boeing should look into researching AI as a natural progression from all of the pilot systems today to see if they can help the cabin crew or pilots in the cabin. After all, about 80% of all aircraft incidents are due to human error. They're very rarely mechanical error. So while there is much more research that would be needed before these could be implemented, Boeing could gain an early adopter's advantage if they begin this research before they're